Good evening, Mr. Bond fans, and welcome once again to another review of a John Gardner novel. This one I had some anticipation for, his novelization of the 1995 film GoldenEye. It's a film that if you've watched any other video on this channel, you will know I love it, and of the novelizations that I've read so far, I always find it interesting coming to them when they can add something extra to the lore of the film. They can give you additional context, they can give you extra things and tidbits that make you look at certain scenes and characters from the films in slightly different ways, or give you slightly different perspectives. So far, I hold up the Christopher Wood novelization of The Spy Who Loved Me as, well, it's not only my favourite novelization that I've read so far, it's probably my favourite Bond continuation novel that I've read so far. Of the Bond novelizations I've read so far, GoldenEye is certainly the one that feels the most like a direct translation of what you see in that film, scene by scene, to the page. Like, down to, like, the edits, down to like, individual cuts in scenes. I couldn't believe how closely this thing just read to what you see in the film. With his previous novelization, License to Kill, Gardner played with the structure an awful lot more, and I was expecting a similar thing from GoldenEye. There was clearly an attempt in that novelization to never leave Bond's perspective. It doesn't carry through the whole thing necessarily. Towards the end, we do shift perspectives, but whereas the film can take a very God's eye view on certain scenes, and we experience them as an audience without Bond there. The scene where Felix is fed to the shark springs to mind. In the novelization, we don't experience that scene that way. We are with Bond pretty much the whole time, and we discover along with him when he finds his friend maimed. I was particularly curious if he'd try something similar with GoldenEye, because that film, you know, we experience a good chunk of the narrative from other characters' perspectives, Natalya specifically. But no, GoldenEye is pretty much beat for beat, almost cut for cut in some places, a straight up retelling of that GoldenEye film. With some notable exceptions though, and we'll get into it. But yes, the story is the same. If you've seen the film, you know exactly what happens in this book. 007, 006 on a mission together at the start, 006 seemingly killed, and then later on he turns out to be Yanis. He has Ourumov, Xenia, and Boris working for him. Natalya is a programmer thrust into things after the stealing of the GoldenEye device at her workplace. There's EMPs, a female M, tanks, trains, bungee jumps, Q, don't touch that, that's my lunch, it's all here. Though I didn't immediately know if that was going to be the case, because the opening chapter is something of a prelude to the dam jump that we see in the film. And there are a few places in the book that add a thing or two to certain scenes that we see in the film, and that's primarily what I'm going to be discussing in the rest of this video. Things that stuck out to me that are diversions from scenes and characters in the film as we know it. So yes, the book opens with Bond on his trek to the facility that he and 006 are to blow up. We learn that the name of this particular operation is Cowslip, and I do quite like how Gardner makes Bond's journey to the facility sound like a real ordeal. It was a real journey for Bond to get there that took a lot of time, and we even get a little snippet of the old male assigning Bond and Trevelyan to this mission. And then Bond takes out a couple of guards, and in some way this reminded me of a little deleted scene from GoldenEye that you can see on the Blu-ray extras. Gardner's version of the sequence is much more violent. In the deleted scenes we can see Bond is being very stealthy, just sort of sneaking past them to get to his bungee jumping spot, but it did get me wondering what Gardner was working from to make this novelization. As with a lot of Bond films, GoldenEye had many different writers and different ideas coming into the scripts, and I think sometimes with novelizations it's quite interesting because those things that are deleted in the editing process or rewritten still make it through to the novelization just because of timelines and deadlines. The fact that this is so close, like I say, down to edits, it does make me feel like he either had a very complete, revised version of the filming script or a work print. One section of the story that I was keen to get to was the part involving Xenia and the hijacking of the Tiger helicopter, and I talked a bit about this in my in-depth review of the film a while back, there is some vagueness as to who the person hijacking along with Xenia is. Obviously, the night prior we see Xenia is with an admiral, she kills him in bed, Bond finds him dead, but someone with Xenia Xenia uses the Admiral's ID to gain access to the Tiger helicopter event, and we only see this character from behind, but it looks like the same actor, and he's using the Admiral's photo ID, so presumably this is a double, and then presumably it is that double who gets into the helicopter with Xenia and flies off. It was interesting reading some of the comments on my GoldenEye video discussing this matter, because people seem quite kind of divided over, like, whether or not this is just some random double who it works for Trevelyan, but who we do not see in any other scene of the film, whether it's Trevelyan in disguise or Ourumov in disguise. Gardner confirms the presence of a double in his story, and that he is presumably the character leaving in the helicopter with Xenia, but there's no confirmation as to who that double actually is. It's such a weird aspect of GoldenEye's story. I assume it's a similar thing to Thunderball, where they had a double of the pilot to carry out the evil scheme, but we never learn more about this GoldenEye general double character in either the film or the novelization, which I thought was a little disappointing. A novelization is ideally the place that you come to for expanding on details like that, but nope, still a mystery to me. So the second biggest additional scene by my reckoning comes shortly after the whole Tiger helicopter hijack. Instead of going immediately to Cervanaya, we actually have an extra Bond-M meeting. This is before all the briefing room stuff that we see in the film, and it's here that Gardner describes the new M and her office. M's office had changed beyond belief since Bond's old chief had retired. There was no rich smell of his pipe, no soft leather chairs, no hint of the old man's brilliant career in the Royal Navy. The new M had brought with her the sterility of the current technocracy. The furniture was almost a parody of high-tech office fittings. There was a Scandinavian influence, posture-improving chairs, her own chair, which was not a chair, but something into which you appeared to contort your body. The black desk held no clutter, but for the very large computer monitor and a movable lamp, plus, naturally, several color-coded telephones. M glanced up at Bond and fixed him with a long, serious look. She wore a severe black business suit. Her hair was styled very short, almost a thin cap on her scalp. At her neck was one piece of jewelry, a single white on blue cameo brooch, clasped high on her blouse. Looking at her eyes, Bond thought of the old joke about the bank manager with one glass eye. People could always tell which the glass one was, because it was the eye that showed compassion. I quite enjoyed some of the extra stuff between Bond and this new M in the book, particularly after how soft the old M had become over the duration of Gardner's books. I enjoyed reading a bit more of a spicier interaction between the pair, and it's interesting how willing Bond is to talk back to this new M. He doesn't like her at the very start, and he's speaking to her in a way that he would never have done the previous M, for whom he obviously had an awful lot of respect. This is a short extra bit, it's only a few pages, but I liked it a lot. There's a bit of a weird moment later on in a different chapter where Bond slightly chides M for smoking, and he says something like, you know, oh, they're bad for your health, you know, and it's really weird reading literary Bond pass judgment on someone else's smoking habit, but okay. The story then moves to Severnaya, and we meet Natalya and Boris. Gardner doesn't do the whole dirty password thing, which is interesting. Odd omission, I think. The whole theft of the GoldenEye device takes place. So, you know in the film how once everything has been blown up and Ourumov and Xenia have gone, and Natalya emerges from the wreckage of the building and she finds some sled dogs, and those are presumably how she gets back to civilization. Have you ever wondered how and why those sled dogs got there? Well, wonder no more. So in the film we do have a quick insert of the dogs at work pulling some guy along, and Gardner expands on this guy. He is a Inuit Eskimo, and this is what befalls him. The Inuit was very tired, anxious to see his family again, for the entire trip had taken the best part of a week. Though he would never know it, the accident occurred because of his fatigue and the pace at which he ran the dogs. He did not even see the boulder peeping from the slick ground. The lead dog saw the danger a fraction too late, swerved to avoid the obstacle, and swung the sled into an impossible turn. The runners hit the boulder off-center, and the driver was thrown hard against a cluster of rocks and ice. Even with the layers of fur and the big hood he wore, the man broke several bones, including his neck. He tried to move, but could not even stir for the pain. He lay there in the snow, with the dogs whining and clustering around him. He made a supreme effort, one last great push through the agony, attempting to get up. This last action killed him, and he dropped back onto the ground, a little bundle of fur. The dogs dogs gathered around him for a while, as though trying to give their master some warmth to revive him. After 10 minutes or so, they sat down and waited. Eventually, the lead dog would guide them back to the tiny settlement, but for the moment, they kept a vigil over their dead master. Nobody could know how this accident and the unsupervised dog team would save another life in the next few hours. So there we go, expanded knowledge for us all. Natalya related detail that I did quite like, though. In the film, there's a quick moment where Bond deduces that she was at Severnaya because he looks at her watch and it stopped at the exact time that the EMP went off. Why would a person keep wearing a broken watch? Well, it had sentimental value to Natalya, we read in the book. Her parents had scrimped and saved to get her it as a nice gift before she went to university, and indeed her parents are mentioned at another part of the book as well. Natalya rationalizes that she can't turn to them for help or go to their home because she doesn't want to put them in risk of danger. Just a couple of nice little touches that I quite liked. We get another aside that's kind of similar to that whole dog sled thing in terms of just, you know, I'm not sure we really needed that additional bit of context, but this takes place just as Bond has taken the tank and he's chasing after Ourumov. He's kidnapped Natalya. In the car, there was a touch of terror in Ourumov's voice as he shouted to the driver to move it. The fear, which now came as a stench from the general, was founded on an accident during the Afghanistan campaign, where he had been in a tank similar to the T-55 that rumbled at their heels. Ourumov's tank had taken a direct hit, and the general was one of only 2 people to get out alive. In his darker dreams, he could still hear the screams coming from the rest of the crew as the metal coffin burst into flames. He had shown a not unnatural fear of tanks from that time.
Every night I wake up screaming.
The mind boggles as to why Gardner felt we needed that extra little tidbit about Ourumov's life. I didn't think we needed to give him extra motivation for being a bit afraid about being chased through the streets by an enemy agent in a tank, but there we go. One change that I did really like during the tank sequence, though, comes towards the end. Gardner gives it more of a climax, I would actually say. Bond comes up against this barricade at the very end of the sequence, and they have an anti-tank gun, and he has to defeat them to continue on. I thought it was really cool and a good bit of escalation. It was nice to give him a bit more of a challenge to overcome at the end of that particular sequence. Something else that I quite liked as well a little bit after, so this is when Bond has fired at Trevelyan's train, and he's gotten on the train and he's holding Trevelyan and Xenia at gunpoint. Don't do anything stupid, Alec. I really don't want to kill you. I want to take you home. Oh yes, home, by which I presume you mean England, home and beauty. No, I mean England. Home and justice. I really liked that little bit, and I kind of wish it was in the film, actually. I like how he's kind of like, yeah, you are going to come back with me and justice will be served, but I'm not going to kill you. Which makes sense because of their history together. In the film, you don't really get much of a sense of that in that scene. It feels like after the whole statue park thing, Trevelyan is just a baddie and he must be stopped and killed.
He was your friend, Trevelyan. And now he's your enemy and you will kill him. It is that simple.
In a word, yes.
The third biggest addition to what we see in the film is, well, almost an entire chapter, really. This is chapter 16. It's called Interlude, and it covers what Bond and Natalya do in between escaping Trevelyan's exploding train and arriving in the Caribbean. They have Jack Wade helping them out of Russia, and he has these disguises. Bond dresses up as an old man, and Natalya dresses up in a schoolgirl outfit, which certainly stirs Bond. Bond looked her up and down. The white knee socks did his libido a power of good. The same chapter holds quite possibly the most graphic description of sex that I think I've read in any of these Bond books. The only one that I think comes close is The Spy Who Loved Me. The next minute or so of the video might be considered R-rated, folks. She felt his hands slide under her buttocks, pressing, stroking, and kneading them as he bent his mouth to kiss first one breast and then the other. Her hands guided him down, and he slid into her, thick and long, so that she lifted her buttocks in his hands and let out a sharp breath of pleasure. They had become one person, locked and moving slowly through the wonder of that great pleasure only woman can give to man and man to woman. She murmured something as he thrust deep into her, a Russian expression for loving, he thought. Then their mouths closed on each other and they were swept away in that dance which neither ever wanted to end. Yet eventually it reached its peak in a kind of explosion and cleansing, sweeping them to the shore of some place beyond this planet, far from their previous experience. Really took me back how descriptive that was. Maybe Mrs. Gardner had been been away for a while or something. I don't know, things get really horny in chapter 16 for some reason. The whole final act of the story happens really quickly, and it kind of reads like Gardner like hit the minimum word count and just raced his way through describing the final 20 minutes or so maybe of the film. It's kind of disappointing that the "for England, James, no, for me" dialogue is missing, and instead we just have Bond telling Alec to go to hell, which doesn't have quite the same poignancy. I've talked about some of what I would consider to be the bigger changes, or things that stuck out to me while I was reading through this. I just want to make it clear, there are plenty of differences to the dialogue and speech and the little additions here and there, including Wade taking Bond on a little city tour in his car, which feels like a bit of a history lesson to me, but it had some little interesting bits of trivia. My main point is that these were the biggest changes that stuck out to me when I was reading through this that I thought were maybe interesting, and they don't really change the overall flavor or the structure of the story at all. I was also quite interested that Gardner makes seemingly very little attempt to try and tie this story into his continuity and indeed literary Bond continuity overall, which kind of makes sense in a way because in Seafire, the previous book, there was a big shake-up to the format. MI6 had become Micro Globe 1, Bond was with Flicker, he proposed to her, so he would have had to have done an awful lot of backpedaling to justify some of the things that need to happen in this novelization. Though I will say that in Seafire, you know, the old M was quite ill and not really on the scene all that much, so the fact that this book has a new female M come in, like, that worked quite nicely continuity-wise. But again, I just thought it was interesting, particularly after License to Kill really jumped through some hoops to try and make that novelization work within the literary Bond continuity, with Felix getting attacked by a shark for the second time. Considering that, for the most part, I was reading GoldenEye being like, okay, this is just a completely standalone novel. There is, however, one passage towards the end of the story that clearly proves me wrong in that regard. I had to turn to Twitter for some answers for this, because even though I just, like, read Seafire a couple of weeks ago, I totally didn't connect this. This is at the end of chapter 16, so this is after Bond and Natalya have had sex in the film. It's when they're in that beach hut. Presently, she asked him if he knew this island well. Why? Oh, I just had a feeling that you knew where you were going when we were out driving this afternoon. He lay silent for a moment. I know it, he said softly. In some ways, I have reason to hate it, but now there is a new reason for me to love it. Something sad happened to you here? Something I shouldn't talk about, I'm afraid. Once more, a long pause. There was a woman, she said bluntly. It's okay, James. I'm not jealous about what happened before we met. Yes. He heard the tiny kink at the back of his throat. Yes, there was a woman. She's alive, but she may never walk again. We were dealing with a very bad man. As bad as Ourumov? On a scale of 1 to 10, they'd come out about equal. I had to really rack my brains to figure out who he was talking about there. Like, okay, when was he last in the Caribbean, and when was there a Bond girl who lost the use of her legs? I had to put this question out on Twitter, and thank you very much to Adam Hegarty and Mark Edlitz for pointing me in the right direction, giving me answers for this. So in that little exchange, Bond is apparently, indeed, referring to Flicker, the Bond girl who was very much beaten up and who he proposed to in the previous book. I totally didn't make the connection, but yeah, the end of Seafire is set in the Caribbean, and Flicker is very much beaten up, and Bond finds her, rescues her, but the extent of Flicker's injuries are not detailed in that book, so you know, I guess inferring from GoldenEye then, she lost the use of her legs and Bond left her? I've got one more Gardner story to come after this, and I'm hoping that he's kind of going to expand on that a little bit more, because Flicker was a character that I actually quite liked. She was in the previous two Gardners. It feels like he was really laying the groundwork for some kind of long-term plan for Bond and her that was a bit different from the usual, you know, oh, Bond falls in love and then she dies, which I was finding quite interesting. And if this is indeed how his continuity is going to continue, I'm very, curious to see how that presumably is addressed in his next book. It really took me off guard as well because, like I say, I'd just gone through most of this assuming, oh, fine, it's standalone, it's not in the continuity. But then you know, throwing something like that in at the very end just brings up some annoying questions, like, well, Flicker was supposedly the woman of Bond's dreams, so what, like, he's left her and now he's having a whale of the time with Natalya? I don't know what's going on there. I would have been totally fine and probably happier if this was just standalone, but just that extra little bit of an attempt at trying to make it work in the continuity, just like, you don't need to do it, John. Overall, though, I have to admit to quite enjoying reading through GoldenEye. I mean, I admit I'm an easy lay when it comes to anything GoldenEye, and this is indeed pretty much a straight-up translation of that story from screen to page. I made my way through it super quickly. It's quite short, to the point of feeling rushed towards the end, but enjoyable. My quandary when it comes to ranking is that the film is obviously the best way to experience this story, and I don't know if I got that much extra out of the process of reading this novelization as I have done other Bond novelizations. I feel like License to Kill even had more noteworthy things in it, but I guess I preferred reading GoldenEye more, so I am gonna place it just above License to Kill in my ranking. Neither come close to being my favourite Bond novelizations, though. I still highly recommend the Christopher Wood books as really great. Like, Spy Who Loved Me in particular, I feel like I probably waffle on about that a little bit too much whenever I talk about Bond books, but it really took me aback how much I enjoyed that and how genuinely great I think it is. So, recommend those. License to Kill and GoldenEye are probably only for, like, uber fans of the films. Like, if you really do adore either or both of those films, you will probably get something small, like I did, out of reading the novelizations. So I almost can't believe I'm saying this, folks, but next time, we will be looking at the 16th and final John Gardner James Bond continuation novel, Cold. But yes, I feel like, you know, I've been with Gardner for so long now. He's accompanied me on my commutes for far longer than I ever anticipated. So I am quite looking forward to getting to his last book. After that video, I will be making another video, kind of a bit of a wrap-up of Gardner. I have quite a lot to say about his tenure overall, and I do get asked quite a bit, if you had to recommend any of Gardner's books, which ones would you do? And I think I know the three that I would pick as best examples of kind of, you know, an overall flavor of his work, but I want to make a video just talking about him more broadly and what he really did bring to the Bond literary series. But all of that is to come in the future. In the meantime, if you have read the GoldenEye novelization, please do let me know in the comments section below. Please do let me know your own thoughts. If there were any bits in it that stuck out to you in particular that I neglected to mention in this video, please do start the conversation below. And also below you can click the subscribe button and the Mrs. Bell notification button to stay super up to date on future video uploads, as well as follow me on a variety of social media links. And with all that being said, and until next time, Bond fans, so long for now.